So after the long video on advanced chess strategy, I feel obliged to offer something to my more new players. And I've compiled a few practical examples on a topic that I think is really, really relevant to players that are like under 1500, under 1000, and that is the topic of piece trades. Because I see mistakes getting made in that like all the time in my students' games across all levels, really, but certainly more at the under 1500 level. So here we go. This is going to be our first example, courtesy of my dedicated student, Jerry, who played this game and first introduced me to this position. So shout out to him. And in this position, he's got like the advantage of the bishop pair. And well, you guys may or may not know it yet, but having two bishops is definitely an advantage over a bishop and a knight in most positions. And here it's white's turn to move, and he decided to take the knight. So in my opinion, this is a very forgivable mistake for a player, like really anywhere, I don't know, maybe even up to 2000, I would say. Because you are doing something that seems fundamentally good, which is opening up your opponent's king. So really this trade, even though it's not the best, I think it can be certainly excused, right? Well, I mean, the idea is that white is thinking they're going to get some big attack on the black king. And what they're not realizing was that, they are giving up a really powerful bishop for a knight. And it's not actually that easy to get to this king. Black's queen is quite a powerful defender, and she can defend through all these various dark squares on the board. So for example, by the way, black is, well, he's not exactly up a pawn, but this pawn is a little bit dangerous to take. So black can go something like that. It's important to develop your pieces when you play chess. Of course, at some point you can take that pawn. For example, on rook f6, I would certainly think about getting that tempo. And basically, it's not as easy for white to mate this king as they thought. So this trade is not correct. The better move, which actually another student of mine rated definitely under 1000 played, was this move. Yeah, you're advancing in the center, opening up the light squared bishop, so he becomes better at the expense of the dark squared one. But it's worth it. And you kick away the knight from the defense of the king. So this was a good first step. And now, if I'm white, I would really just focus on the essentials. I mean, the bishop is wonderful, but you're not really going to get like an immediate checkmate, right? Like I wouldn't really bother bringing in my queen before I do something essential like castling. So this move just needs to get done, guys. It's that important in chess. Just do it. And later on, this queen is going to choose a square on the d1 h5 diagonal to come into the attack, and this game should finish with an attack on the black king. But instead, my student starts to show his inexperience, and so he puts the queen here, presumably because he was concerned about this pawn and also thought the attack on the h7 pawn would be powerful, guys. But remember, a battery with the queen behind the bishop is not the same thing as a battery with the queen in front of the bishop. I mean, there's so much less power when the queen is behind, right? And by the way, this pawn is completely irrelevant. Like this queen could just move in for the attack. And there's so many ideas here, like you're threatening e6 with a checkmate here. You're threatening rook c1 with a pin. I mean, no one cares about the weak isolated pawn on c3 that was just captured. Black has a weak king and poor development. It's much more important. So I think that's actually also maybe a big difference between more and less experienced players, right? Like less experienced players will think that that pawn is a problem, while more experienced players will just understand that there's other things much more important going on here, like the potential of the attack against the black king and the advantage in development. So queen c2 is definitely a step in the wrong direction. Actually, I was the one playing black in this position. I was like practicing against my student, so I played h6. Then he castled, and bishop b7. So I'm trying to get some development in. And then he kind of surprised me with his next move, bishop e4. So already I was like, what's that about? Like, what, that seems like a waste of a move, right? not really sure what the bishop is doing, of course, guys, it's actually still possible to rectify your mistake and try to return the queen to the king side where it belongs for the attack to take place. So bishop e4, again, I'm just focusing on developing my pieces, maybe scaring my opponent with some ideas like actually maybe knight to b4, sort of discovery based on this pin. And, it is actually pretty hard for white to deal with this position compared to what there was a few moves ago, right? You basically have to try to move this queen somewhere, but then you also have to deal with like knight c3. It's not that easy. The computer is giving this move far from obvious, and certainly it's like a letdown from what white had. But my student just nonchalantly takes this knight. Now, when I see this trade, now I'm not I guess he thought the knight was dangerous, and it definitely has some ideas, right? But that doesn't mean that taking the knight is going to be the solution. That giving up a bishop for a knight and also just giving black's bishop this amazing diagonal, completely uncontested, that somehow that's going to be the best way to play. So first of all, guys, I want you to remember one basic principle. Bishops are better than knights in most positions. So even if you're facing a problem, it doesn't mean that like just throwing away a bishop is going to be the best approach. So yeah, your instinct should always be preserve the bishops unless you really don't see a way to, or unless one of your bishops is bad. Like this is just a good bishop. Why would you want to give him up? So when you give him up, the effect is that black's bishop becomes really good. This one's not as effective. And basically, we set the stage for white to lose. White played here. Of course, white's position is not losing yet, but it sort of gets there. I played queen c4, checking to see if my young student would notice my threat against the bishop. A little bit sneaky. Well, maybe he did notice it. He took the pawn. But there was, something prepared against that too. And now white is definitely facing an unpleasant situation with the bishop under attack and the x-ray on the a2 pawn. So, and the game is over, right? Everything collapses on the second rank. So things ended really, really quickly. And if we want to look for the culprit, it's definitely the piece trade that white made, giving up a really good bishop, helping black get a very strong uncontested bishop. So basically, guys, you need to consider piece trades as one of the most important decisions that you make in chess. It's completely irreversible. These pieces are not coming back this game. And when your good pieces leave the board, what do you have left to play with? All right, so that's one example. Now let's go to actually a higher level. So now we have students who are rated 1800 playing this game. And this opening is not working out too well for white. Black is going to break through with the move d5 in the center. White's development isn't great. They're not castled. The pin is definitely annoying. And yeah, for those of you who are higher rated watching this video, you probably know that this breakthrough against these Maroczy bind pawns, what we call them, is a very thematic idea. So white took a couple of times, obviously very unpleasant. Black has better development. Basically, the position is symmetric, except black has the bishop out, and white has this absolutely useless and harmful pawn move that just weakens the king. So not a good situation for white. So white took here and defended. And now something really incredible happened. I mean, I consider white, rated in the 1600s, black rated in the 1600s too, basically be at a level where this should be not so hard, right? I mean, what am I talking about here? Well, black has better development. Black is capable of castling and white is not. And kind of clear that when you can castle and your opponent's king is in the center, you gotta attack, right? Like the whole focus of this position is like the white king. So normally you should be just castling, trying to get your rook to e8 and keeping the queens on the board for an attack on the king, right? So if they take, you can actually just take back using a little trick. It is, of course, a tactical trick. Why aren't we just losing the bishop? Because we have the check. Then we take the bishop and we proceed to keep attacking the white king. But what did black do instead? For some reason, they decided trading knights and then trading bishops and then trading queens was the right strategy. Well, sure, black is fine in this endgame. You can even say they're a little better, but it really seems to be the opposite of what the position was indicating. Why are we trading queens when we should be the ones attacking? So I would at least, like at this point, like somewhere here, I mean, I wouldn't make that final queen trade. Like even if the first two already were the wrong track, I mean, do something, show some inclination to keep the queens on the board. And I know it's not as simple, because white, like in a lot of moves, white has this sort of queen block, right? Where they can try to get themselves castled eventually. But still, do a check, maybe weaken the king a little bit more from this direction, move the queen back and keep the queens on the board. Like we are, we're not trading queens, guys. The opponent's king is weaker than ours. So we keep the queens on the board. We play the middle game. So that is a really big one too, guys, because the queen trade, it's especially significant because you're not just changing a piece, you're changing the game from a middle game to an end game, right? That's a really, really significant transition. So that I think is a whole special category of piece trade mistakes that we want to try to avoid. Now, finally, let's go to one more since, this is players 1800 here. So white has to make a decision. It was a French defense opening. You can see the sort of white taking the space with these pawns, black having this whole pawn chain, and we got to make a decision about the bishop. So step back or take the knight and double the pawns, right? Well, I can tell you guys, from my point of view, like this move is just a must. Like I really can't stand the idea of taking the knight, even though I have to tell you that the computer still gives white an edge. And, you might even think like if you analyze with the engine that like you're not even making a mistake if you take the knight, right? The computer's going to applaud you and say, you know what, you're still better. Don't worry. But if I were your coach, I wouldn't applaud that decision. I'd be very sad that you decided to give away a fine light squared bishop because he's very compatible with your dark squared pawn structure. And instead of just moving him back and keeping, everything the same and having plans in this position, of course, later on to like attack, their pawn chain with b3, maybe even rook b1, lots of ideas, knight e3, trying to trade that knight for knight is also an idea. Sometimes you can even attack that knight with g4, right? So there's a lot of options available for white. It is a closed position. It is still like a very, it's a slow maneuvering game. So you're not going to be winning right away, but, obviously I prefer white with a space advantage with that pawn in the center. But white actually took this knight, okay? And they're giving up a really important bishop. So again, guys, if you don't have a great reason, don't give up bishops for knights. And now I think here's again the difference between the computer and a human being. When I see this position, like I can easily see like how white is going to mess up and lose already from here. Like it doesn't even matter that white is objectively better according to the computer. I can sort of see the outline of how white's not going to figure out what to do with these minor pieces. They don't have the nice light squared bishop anymore. Black is going to like go there, which is what happens to defend the pawns. And at some point, like these pawns can get moving, and black can even take over the game on the king side. And that's actually eventually what happened. And unless you're like at the, I don't know, I would even say IM level, it's actually pretty hard, I think, to navigate this position as white because it's kind of hard to find a plan. It's so closed and you really do have this bishop on c1 that's not great. So yeah, I mean, there are ways to play, like the computer likes, for example, this option, with the idea of putting this pawn here. And again, it's like, well, why does he like white's position so much? I mean, this bishop is terrible. taking this bishop is never really a threat because that just improves black's pawn structure. So in a way, when you're playing this way as white, when you're making these kinds of decisions, guys, and you're not like stockfish, I feel like you're setting yourself up for a pretty difficult time. You're actually, as a practical decision, it's going to be so much harder for you to handle this game when you give up the bishop for the knight. And if you would have just stepped back, kept the bishop, you're not helping your opponent like in any way with that bishop, and you're keeping all your options open. So I really prefer that strategy. So to sum up, guys, I think that when we play chess, one of the most basic decisions that we're going to face is like the question of piece trades. And absolutely all of them are important. Whether it's bishop for bishop, knight for knight, rook for rook. But I think the special ones to pay attention to are like bishops for knights. People tend not to value the bishops the way they should until they get better at chess. So it is good to kind of learn that early and have it as like a default, guys. Like, I will value my bishops more unless I see a really good reason to take a knight. Like, if my bishop is bad and their knight is good, I can do it. Or if I take it and I remove a defender, I win material, I can do it. But make sure you're justifying that trade to yourself and not just aimlessly giving away your bishops. I would be really happy if the viewers of my channel would have the proper appreciation for the bishops, guys. And also the queen trade, right? Because you're completely changing the nature of the game when the queens are coming off the board. So ask yourself, like, am I in attack mode? Am I in defense mode? Like, who is this queen trade going to favor? So all of these decisions are irreversible, and that's why we got to pay special attention to them.